everybody, and welcome. My name is Jen Gunderman. I'm assistant professor in musicology here at Blair, and I'm thrilled to be host of tonight's conversation with Sheryl Crow. The Blair School of Music Conversation Series was launched in 1995 when music industry executive Jim Fogelsong and classical guitarist John Johns interviewed the legendary Chet Atkins. And over the years, faculty hosts have welcomed a diverse array of musicians such as Randy Newman, Amy Grant, Eddie Arnold, and Mark Knopfler. Last winter, the Blair Director of External Relations, Kristen Whittlesey, and I worked to relaunch the series, and our first guest was Peter Frampton. It was good fun last winter. Maybe some of you were there. Tonight, the series returns with a truly wonderful Sheryl Crow. One of the most respected and influential musicians of our generation, Sheryl has won 9 Grammy Awards, sold more than 50 million records worldwide, and inspired countless numbers of people with her music and philanthropy. She has collaborated and performed with many of the world's most well-known musicians, including Michael Jackson, the Rolling Stones, Luciano Pavarotti, Stevie Wonder, Eric Clapton, Tony Bennett, Willie Nelson, Sting, and others. In addition, songs that she has written have been covered by Johnny Cash, Tina Turner, Prince, Celine Dion, and others. And her recordings have been featured in movies, including the James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, Bridget Jones's Diary, Pixar's Cars, and others. Incidentally, she's also my boss. Intelligent, good-looking. It has been my great privilege to play keyboards in her band for the last year and a half. I want to take this opportunity to thank my other boss, Mark Waite, who is the dean of the Blair School of Music here, for giving me time off from classroom teaching to pursue this opportunity. It has been an extraordinary adventure, which you'll hear more about in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the conversation Sheryl Crow. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks you guys for coming.
Thank you especially for sharing your time with us, since I know that only 2 days ago you returned from the UK tour that we just completed. Have you recovered from jet lag?
Well, I have 2 little kids, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and that's my first job. And in fact, before I left tonight, I left this afternoon about 4:15, and my 4-year-old, who is jet lagged, was on the floor saying, our nanny's name is Liz, don't you sometimes just wish Liz was the singer in the family? But yeah, we you know, it's one of those things where if I don't know how many of you all are actually musicians, but you get sleep when you can, and you just are grateful to be working.
The last show that we did was at Royal Albert Hall in London on Friday night, which I have to say tops...
Halloween night.
Halloween! We played Royal Albert Hall on Halloween. Yeah. And that tops the list of places I will probably ever play in
It is
my
my favorite place. I mean, there are some places in America that are truly works of art. All the old Fox theaters, a lot of them have been preserved, and then there are those that are pristine, natural works of art, like the outdoor Red Rocks, and there are places that you are in the gorge in Seattle where you're just standing there and you're thinking, what must it have been like before mankind came and really developed. There are places that are just so awe-inspiring, but that place was built in the maybe 1400s, or was it later than that? Maybe later than that.
Victoria and Albert.
Victoria,
Victoria built it for her
that's
husband,
right.
I think.
And it's an old Shakespearean theater where the stands are, it's all boxes, and they go, there's no tilt to it. It's just straight up, and so you can see everything in the hall. And the first time I played there was in 1995, and Eric Clapton was there, and I'd never met him, and I could see him on the third tier up, leaning out over his arm, looking down at me, and there are those moments where you've held the record and you've sniffed it, and you've read all the credits, and then cut to 30 years later, and there's the guy hanging over the balcony, scrutinizing you to see if are you any good?
It's terrifying.
I've had a lot of those experiences.
I wanted to follow up with some questions about your performing experience. I always wondered, even before I ever met you, piano, I knew that piano is your primary instrument when you were growing up. How did you decide that you wanted to play guitar while you were performing or fronting a band? Because you could have been like Elton John or Fiona Apple or another sort of rocker from behind the piano.
Well, I was raised. I'll give you guys the quick quick version, the Reader's Digest version of my upbringing. I was raised by a very conventional Midwest mom and dad in a small town in Missouri, but they happened to be musicians. They played on the weekends in a swing band. My dad was a lawyer, my mom was a piano teacher, but on the weekends they played in a swing band with all their friends, and they'd come home afterwards and they would play everything on the Magnavox, from Stan Kenton and Buddy Rich to Ella Fitzgerald, and I mean just great music, even popular music of the time. And they would dance, and of course everybody smoked and drank back then. And they would come home at midnight, and my sisters and I would sleep on the stairs so we could hear them in the other, across around the other side of the wall. And so I just assumed that everybody's parents, that's what every kid's upbringing was like. And my mom and dad had an agreement with each other on the big issues. They said they always had a unified front, and one of the big issues was piano. And I started when I was 5, as did my sisters. And my mom was a piano teacher, but she didn't teach us because she didn't want the battles. But she had a room that had 4 pianos in it, because at that time that new, I think it was the Kadai method maybe, where you taught group lessons or a classroom, was very, very modern at the time. So we had a grand piano in the living room and then a playroom that had pianos in it.
4 additional uprights.
Yes, so 4 uprights and then
a
grand piano. And so we all practiced right before dinner, and my mom would be in there stirring, and Kathy, that's a B flat. Karen, that's too fast. Sheryl, that's James Taylor. But so I was the kid that could play by ear, and I really did. I don't know what it is that sends you into your life as a tiny little being that is a part of what you adopt as your mythology. But I always sort of saw myself as an outsider, and I just always found my comfort at the piano.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until later when I wanted to rock that I was like, I can't rock on the piano. I can't. And even though I grew up playing Tapestry, front to back, and all of Elton and all, I wanted to go out and rock. So when I was 25, I picked up a guitar and started teaching myself how to play it.
25?
Mm-hmm.
I even heard an interview with Elton John once where he said the same thing that you're saying. He was like, I mean, when you go, on a guitar, it sounds cool, but listen to what it sounds like on a piano. It's like bing, bong, bong, and not rocking at all.
Yeah, although he can seriously rock the piano.
He can rock.
Yeah, he's disqualified when it comes to. But yeah, I did. I wanted to.
Do you feel different when you play guitar?
Well, there's one thing that happens when you're writing on a guitar. There's a rhythm that happens that you can't necessarily get on the piano. Yeah. There's a percussion that happens on the guitar that you can intimate, where it's trickier on the piano. You do wind up your voicings. I just found that because I knew the piano so well. My voicing, I got lazy. My voicings and my chord changes, what I knew and what I was used to and what I was used to hearing, what sounded pleasing, wasn't necessarily what was cool. Yeah. So I would wind up writing. In fact, most of my big songs I've written on bass. So,
really?
Mm-hmm.
That is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think part of it is because you write melodies to the chords that you are used to using, and that creates limitations. Whereas if you get away from writing to the chords that your hands go to, if you just write to really the root bass, then you wind up writing a real melody,
That's fascinating to me. So you're saying that with the middle sort of gone as a composer, mm-hmm. and are you still always playing the root notes on the bass when you come up with your melodies, or is there also an opportunity to play like McCartney-esque other notes than
well,
the root.
you know, and you know me, I'm a meat and potatoes person, so I'd play the rhythm on the bass and, you know, I'd just get around.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I'd be thinking melody, so.
That's amazing. When did you start playing the bass?
You know, now that I'm a mom and my kids are in school, or one of them is in school, I'm watching how he learns, and my kids are very different, and they're adopted, and they're, I mean, I could have loved any kid, and I signed up for, I don't care what you give me, I don't care what color, I don't care if they have challenges, whatever, and I wound up getting these two boys that are very connected to each other, and musical, but their learning styles are so different. And watching my 7-year-old, I realized that I probably was ADD or ADHD, more likely ADHD than ADD, but I am a person that when I'm playing, I get excited, and then it's like, oh, I want to learn how to play that. Yeah. And I've just always done that. I've been in the studio, and I've always, in fact, my first record when I worked with Bill Bottrell, he would intentionally bring great people into the studio, and then he would say, all right, he'd bring a great guitar player and tell him, you can't play the guitar, you have to play the piano. He'd put us on things that we weren't adept to, so that we would listen and come up with interesting parts. And I just started playing everything and liking it and recording myself doing, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then I would play my demos for people and have them recreate it, you know, but better. So.
But not always better, right?
Well, feel is a funny thing for you guys who are musical. Feel is a very individualistic thing.
Yeah.
Feel and intervals, like the intervals that you choose, really I think are what are your signature. You know, you hear Sting go, oh, you know, only Sting does it, and it makes it sound like him. You know, he chooses, everybody chooses the intervals they choose, and that becomes what we identify you by. You know?
Yeah. You know, and at the same time, I think you're being a little bit humble because you say that you're meat and potatoes, but you had a very serious classical training and upbringing. And by the way, we had a grand piano in our dressing room in Newcastle last week, and she sat down and started playing Rachmaninoff on the grand in there. Yeah, so, you know,
but not very well. See, the downfall of people like me is that and my mom made us practice, but two downfalls. I love Rachmaninoff, but my reach is not, I mean, that's like an 11 or 12 key.
Yeah.
But I would also be the kid that would go, I think will you play it for me? And I just want to make sure I'm playing it. And then they'd play it, and I go, you know, because you listen to it and then just play it back to them. And I would really fake it a lot. So then when I got into college and I had to play what they call juries, which are that's your finals, where you have to play like 12 pieces. You have to have 12 pieces prepared, then they choose 6 of them. I wasn't even faking that, but I would cram the night before, and which is why I don't remember anything.
Well, that's a question I wanted to get asked too. Is most of my favorite pop, rock, country, blues musicians do not have that serious like background and training that you have, and so I'm interested like how you feel that. I'm interested in that tension between your playing by ear, wanting to do your own thing, but also, you know, having the theory chops and the classical chops, and how do you negotiate that, or how do you think it informs the music that you make, the fact that you have all this knowledge?
Well, the first thing that happens is that you go to school and you learn all the rules about composition, like no parallel thirds, no parallel fifths, certain acceptable chord progressions, and then you go into pop music, and everything that you learned in composition and classical, you throw out the window, because pop music is made up of almost all parallel thirds and almost all parallel fifths. And what I really think is that I think everything that I've had in my life as far as training or education has been an experience, and every experience brings you to the place, to your creative spot or your creative place. Everything in your life informs your art. So whether I had studied welding or medicine or whatever, I think I probably would have wound up in music, because it just was ultimately the thing that, you know, carved me, that gave me a sense of identity, that was a lifesaver, that was a fallback, was an escape. I think I would have wound up doing that. And it's the life experiences, I think, that actually ultimately create your art more so than the education or the training or what you know of the rules and the composition, the construction of music. For me, it bought me some time in my maturity before I moved to LA and got lost in the fray.
Right. I want to ask you another question about performing and then maybe come back to songwriting in just a minute too. In general in your career, your stage setups have been, fairly meat and potatoes, as you say. Maybe a video screen, but you're not going to be on a harness, like doing trapeze stuff or have a lot of pyro or sets or,
Not yet.
Not yet.
What I'd like to do is, I'm 52, what I'd like to do is wait until my 60th year. And then I want to put on some kind of like leotard and just fly, like do some,
I would pay to see that show.
A lot of people would pay to see that show. That's my feeling, that's my thinking on it, at least.
So
I keep saying I'm going to be the mom who's like 60-year-old stuffing my ass into a pair of leather jeans in the pickup line at school. I gotta be on stage in 20, get in the car.
Tell you what, a lot of us are happy that you are carrying that flame for us. I'm serious, right? However, this past summer we played some shows where the stages were a little more elaborate. There would be, ego ramps or whatever you call them that would go out in different directions into the crowd. And then when we played the Bridgestone Arena, we had this stage set up where we were in the middle of the arena with 4 different lead vocal mics pushing off into 4 different directions. We had no production rehearsals in either case. The one at the arena, I think, especially blew my mind because we were in the round, all of us facing outward from each other, and you, without a rehearsal, came on and you were like Mick Jagger up there, running around, making sure that you faced all 4 walls at some point. You somehow knew like where you had to go to pick up your guitar, and go. So where did you learn to work a stage like that? Like when did that happen?
Well, it's actually really funny. When I first got started, when I was in college, I was in a lot of different bands, mostly doing covers, and I was always the side person. I was always the keyboard player, never the front person. Right. In high school, I tried out for plays, never made a play. I was so not the front person. If you had looked in the yearbook, it would have been least likely to be a rock star. It would have been me, for sure. And really, I was a school teacher. I moved to LA. I took my cassette tape around to every studio in town and said, I'm new in town, I would love to do some studio work, and I wound up getting some work. And one of the sessions that I did, some people were talking about the Michael Jackson tour, and so I found out where the auditions were, I went and crashed it, I wound up getting it. And I just wound up having this incredible string of experiences where I got to really witness artists at the top of their game. I went from him to Don Henley. I worked with a whole lot of people singing backup. Ernest Isley, Rod Stewart. Just tons and tons and tons of people. And that's a great practice ground. But until you get thrown out on stage and you're on and you're fronting, you don't really get the experience of what it means to actually hold an audience's attention. Now, it's a lot different now because people have cell phones. They're not really that attentive. And also, you get, it's true, ask Jen. I've actually played shows where people have had, like, iPads up. And you're just like, could you just put your TVs down for a minute? But when I first got started, there was no email. There was no cell phones. There were fax machines. And so people came to gigs, and they were there to see you. And I started with 10 people to 100 people to 300 people and it grew, and I had lots of years to really sort of hone my chops, but it wasn't really until I had breast cancer that I started to learn what it meant to be liberated, to just go out and just it sounds ridiculous, but to like celebrate, just to go out and like. I had that particular show that Jen's talking about, we were opening up for George Strait, and that's how he plays. He plays in the round. So he'll do like 2 songs on that mic and 2 songs on that mic, and and his band is facing each other, and it's a really odd way to play. It's very disorienting. But just to go and run from one thing to the next, it's been such an interesting life progression for me to feel like I'm at the top of my game, you know, from 45 to now, where I look back and think I never felt as free before that as I do now, where I just am so, I feel like a kid on a playground when I'm out on stage. It's just so fun to just be out playing music and to actually like connect with people to their faces to the point where it's uncomfortable for them to be holding their phones. You know what I mean? It's like, look at me, you know.
Yeah.
I'm up here shaking my ass.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. I remember that gig kind of giggling through the whole thing because I think that you just sort of ran into it and like grabbed the bull by the horns and went running around. And we couldn't figure out, one, where you were, you know, like half the time, you know, we were looking around or like, you know, and then guys were all wireless. And so then, you know, some of them started wandering. It was like a whole big circus and it was so fun. It was so fun.
Well, there's two ways to look at it. You either go out there and you put on such a great show that people talk about it afterwards, or you go out there and you fall on your ass, and then it gets picked up on YouTube, and then you're the most trended. So
either way,
it works
you win.
out great.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little more about your songwriting. I find that super interesting about the bass things. I was going to ask you where you typically start from, whether it's a melodic idea or a riff or a lyric or a subject matter that you want to deal with. Like, how does a song typically first come to you?
Well, before I had my kids, I had the total freedom and luxury to be creative whenever the creative muse struck me. I would stay up until 4 a.m, you know, hanging out and you know, like in LA, I would have this salon of crazy conspiracy theorists or just interesting literati or whatever. And it was very high-minded and very inspiring. And then, you know, everybody would leave and I would stay up until 5 writing songs. Well, you know, then real life sets in and I'm like, okay, I'm dropping the kids off at school. I got like from 9 to 10 to drink coffee, read the paper, get in a quick workout, and then I'm going to write between. So that idea of inspiration is no longer like this muse-filled, wait for the stars to align. It's really much more calculated. And honestly, having made my last record like that, I don't feel like it really has compromised my ability to write a good lyric. I don't feel the same about them necessarily. I look at them and I think, gosh, really well crafted, some of the best stuff I've written. But it's those ones where I was up at 4 a.m. with just an aching heart that when I play them now, I still feel that, you know. And generally those things those songs, the best ones would be the ones that came on the heels of having tried to like, I'm going to write something great, and then you work on something and work on it, and then finally just let go of it and start playing something, and then the next thing you know, you have a great song that you've written from the heart, and it's maybe not perfect, but it was inspired. The record I wrote after having a very public breakup and then moving to Nashville, having had breast cancer, moving to Nashville, and then adopting my son. I waited after I had this horrible culmination of events of having a really public breakup and then getting cancer 6 days later or being diagnosed, and I felt like, you know, the world of tabloids kind of close in on me, and it made me really lose faith in mankind. I really felt like, gosh, we're buying these things, and we got people that are like camping outside my house trying to get like long lenses through my windows, and just to get a glimpse of me at my lowest. And it felt so crappy. And my knee jerk, whenever I feel anything, is to go to the guitar or go to the piano and write. And I thought, you know, I'm going to actually force myself to feel this experience. I'm going to grieve over the loss of my relationship and the stepkids. I'm going to grieve over the fact that my body that I don't have control over everything. And I'm going to be afraid, and I'm going to be angry, and I'm going to experience all those emotions, because what we do in Western culture is we've been taught to just keep yourself busy. This is going to pass, or just try to keep yourself busy and don't think about it. And we've gotten really good at it. We've gotten really good at distracting ourselves. But ultimately, what winds up happening is that we miss out on experiencing our true authenticity and experience our lives, our awakening. The gateway to awakening is experiencing emotion, holding an emotion. The only way you can manifest things in your life is to experience the longing that belongs with the thing that you're missing. And it took me so long to figure that out, because I've been a person that has been raised to be productive. I've attached my self-worth to being productive, and not to just being productive, but to producing greatness, to being, to having integrity, that great old Puritan work ethic. If you do great, good things will come to you. If you work hard, you'll get to where you want to go. And the reality of that is that it's really a masculine way of looking at life. And I went up with breast cancer, which is an attack of the very organs that are nurturing and nourishing. So I had to really look at all that and put it all together and look at my life and determine, why am I at this point in my life? And I'm going to sit with it and work my way through it, so I'm not just continuing to avoid the signs that are right in front of me. And I picked up and I moved to Nashville, and I didn't write for a year. I didn't go to the piano. I didn't go to all those things that have given me a sense of accomplishment, a sense of position, a sense of anything. I just stripped it back just to help myself remember who I came in as. And I realized that all the events in your life are really just served up for all of us to remember who we are. And I sat down and started writing. And one of the first things I wrote was from an article in the New York Times about the real estate crash. But the title of that article was "God Bless This Mess." And it was 6 a.m, and Wyatt was asleep, and I was having coffee, and I wrote a song. I wrote that song just from the title. So you just don't ever know what is going to be. What's going to be kind of serendipitous. What's going to tie you to something that just resonates, and that's where those are the things you just go, thank you. Gratitude for infinite possibility.
Yeah. Do you think that fear and pain can be a gateway to creativity for people, or do you think that that's just one way that you can access?
I don't think fear manifests anything at all. Fear is immobilizing and is not a productive state to be in, and it's a false state. It's not informing you of the reality. It's just keeping you paralyzed. And I've always been a really critical person of myself, not of other people. Like if somebody said to me what I've said to myself my whole life, I would not be friends with that person. And it's taken me a long time. I would write a song and go, this is the worst piece of shit ever. And, I have boxes and boxes of the beginnings of things. And I also think that pain thing, I do think that there's an urgency there are people who just have to express. And there are great musicians who are expressive, but I think there's a difference between really being an artist and feeling a sense of urgency about needing to purge something that you just need to say for yourself. And I think that's why throughout history, even just looking at art throughout our evolution, our art has always been the thing that we've been able to look at to identify who we've been in any given point in our history. It's documented us, and our paintings, our writers, our musicians, our art forms at large have been what have documented our civilizations. You know, right down to pottery, right down to what we dig up in archaeological digs. That tells us who we were. It tells us about how we lived. And even now, you know, you can talk about how dismal music is. You have to look at everything as being basically a direct correlation of who we are in our evolution. You know, I look at the 60s, and the 60s was really the result of what was happening in the 50s. The 50s was a time when we were just out of a war. From the 40s, we've had a really incredible financial, our economy is really booming. Everything is very conventional. The women are in the kitchen and the men are going to work and money is being made, and usually out of that becomes a false sense of comfort, and then questioning, and then some social unrest. And then you have the 60s, and the 60s really became a moment in our history where creativity was, for our youth culture, was a godsend, and also it was the people who were making the art were what we all related to. It gave us a voice. It's what music still does for many of us, where we listen to a song and think, how could that person have known that I was going through that? You know, it's such a personal thing. Maybe it's less personal now because we don't have that experience of holding the album and sharing it with our friends, but it still exists. And I think some of the best songs in history have been written from a painful place, but I don't know that every song, that we have to wait around until we're in pain to write it. Sometimes actually we have to wait until we're out of it to be able to give some perspective to it, to be able to write it in a way that is attainable.
Yeah. When I think of you as an artist, most of the time I think of you in those environments that you created or just described, where it's 4 in the morning or it's 6 and you're by yourself and you've had inspiration. But you've also been a very frequent collaborator with other people. And I'm wondering how like another personality in the room affects what you do, or whether you enjoy that process, or how that works for you, since you write by yourself, but you also write with other people sometimes too.
I have had I had a first record that came out, that didn't come out, and it was mostly solo stuff. And then the record that actually came out first was called Tuesday Night Music Club, and it was highly collaborative. And that was really the first time I'd sat in a room with people and, drank and smoked. It was like my parents. And we wrote music and we hung out until the wee hours of the morning. And I mean, it was really debauched. But, for somebody who was as a late bloomer as I was, that was probably my teenage years.
Yeah.
But out of that came a really fruitful relationship with somebody I met kind of on the periphery of that, this guy named Jeff Trott. Mm-hmm. And we were just kindred spirits, and we wrote a few songs together, and he just played all the things that we had very similar influences, and he played in a way that I would pick up from a riff, pick up something and start running with it, and it was fun. He was like a musical counterpart that was very compatible. And then from then on, I wrote with other people and just didn't really enjoy it as much. I think I've always felt like it would be fun. It's fun to write with people because sometimes you get outside of yourself or get outside of the usual things that you do. This last record, I collaborated with more people than I have ever. And it was great because I learned how they do it here in Nashville. I don't know if I'll do it that way again, but I really enjoyed it. There's sort of a system here, and I will say that there are some of the most amazing songwriters ever here. But there's a system where there's 3 people in a room, and you really get at the perfect lyrics, and one way or the other, or maybe not always, but you get at something, and it's, I guess, a means of finishing songs and stuff, but,
Let that lie right there. I know that you have, so getting back to there's one other question about songwriting I want to ask you, which is that I know you write songs that are singles or that belong with an album or that you write specifically for a movie, but I know that recently you've also been writing a musical based, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but it's a musical based on the film Diner, and you're collaborating with the director and writer of that film, Barry Levinson. And I'm wondering how writing for musicals is different than other writing that you've done before.
Well, and I may be a dinosaur because I grew up when there were not that many channels on TV, and I grew up watching song and dance movies. I mean, I loved all that old stuff. You know, Oklahoma. I mean, I couldn't wait for Thanksgiving because The Wizard of Oz was going to be on, and It's a Wonderful Life was always on the Friday after. You know, it was the build up to Christmas, and Holiday Inn, and Porgy and Bess, and every Rodgers and Hammerstein, every West Side Story, just Cole Porter, all that stuff. And my parents listened to it. I mean, they played the records. We grew up knowing, we knew all the big melodic songs that are part of our American lineage. I mean, they played Burt Bacharach. I grew up with melody, but really the tradition of theater, where there are themes that run all the way through musicals, and there are characters who have their own theme, and then those themes sometimes intertwine, and there's a duet, and you know, there's a cheese element to it, but still, I just slapped it up to the point where after I saw American in Paris, I wrote, I think I was 9 or 10, I wrote Gene Kelly, because I just was sure that we were supposed to be together. I was sure of it. And I wrote him and said, I'm going to grow up, and please wait. I mean, I was sure of it. And I sent it off to Warner Brothers Records, Warner Brothers Studios, Mr. Gene Kelly, and a year later, I got a letter back. Just a signed picture just saying, good luck, Gene Kelly.
Aww.
But anyway, got to. I didn't marry him. But I just, when Barry Levinson, who is the writer-director of Diner, called me 4 years ago, he called me and said, hey, I didn't know him at all, and I got this call from my manager saying Barry Levinson wants to get a hold of you, and I'm thinking, don't know why, but anyway, so he called me and he said, I want to develop Diner and try to translate it to stage as a musical, and I love your music. I've been listening to it. He cited all these different songs that seemed like they had nothing to do with anything to me, but he's like, he just found that whatever I was doing, it just resonated with him, and so I got involved in it, and it's been a challenge, but it's been really one of the most interesting and fun things I've ever done, because it is not what I do at all. Right. But I have such a love for it and such an understanding of it, and I have enough composition in my back pocket to know how to make things work that it's been great.
Oh, yeah. I'm one of a lucky few who heard the demos that they are. Yeah,
and you may be one of the lucky few that hear it ever.
To me, the demos are so good. You could just put that out as a thing, you know.
Well, it's been interesting, because if you're an artist and you're used to writing, like toiling over your albums, and I still make albums that have a beginning and a middle and an end and an arc, and to write on assignment is just so different. Yeah. But it became really fun once I got the characters in my head and I could write from their point of view, and it's been really fun.
It's great, and I hope that other people besides me get to hear it.
Yeah, we're actually we're doing previews in DC starting, it opens December 21st, and hopefully it will be lovingly received and go to Broadway in the spring or in the fall, so we'll see.
Yeah. A lot of the musical skills that you possess, the multi-instrumentalism, we've talked about knowledge of theory, classical music, we talked about songwriting, toiling, as you say, take a whole lot of hard work and a whole lot of hours to master. Singing, on the other hand, is something that, your voice is famous. You probably know this. You're, considered to be one of the great singers of our time. And it's singing in general, I think, is something that a lot of people assume comes naturally or is more of a gift that someone might have. And so my question for you is, do you work as hard on your singing as you do on your songwriting and your bass playing and the other things that you do?
Well, no. I mean, unfortunately, no. I think I'm a better singer now than I have ever been. And I'm lucky because my mom is an amazing singer. In fact, one of the best singers I've ever heard. She certainly, had she had other opportunities, she could have been an opera singer. I mean, she's just amazing. And then as she's gotten older, her voice has even gotten better. But my thing has always been that I've tracked in the studio because I've produced my records since the first one. After the first one, I started producing myself, and I would track on the bass with a guitar player, usually Jeff, and a drummer. And then we would start overdubbing, and then I would get used to that vocal, and I just really wouldn't go back and replace it, or I just got really lazy about it. I didn't really enjoy singing as much as I enjoyed the spontaneity of playing and performing. And, I listen to those records now and think, oh, I wish I could go back and re-sing those things. Yeah. But,
I don't know. I think you might be overly humble again, though, because she can do that Mariah Carey mini Ripperton, like that thing. You've got incredible versatility and control, and you take.
Oh, I can't do it right now. But if I was singing, I can go into it. But
she can sing melodies like that. And you also told me that you used to be able to do the overtone singing thing, like the tuba.
Yeah, I used to sing a perfect quarter, like a fourth.
She can sing two notes at the same time.
But that's when you know your voice is really damaged.
Also, a doctor told you to stop doing that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right, so don't do
Great
it.
party trick
right now.
But
so yeah,
I can harmonize with myself.
So yeah, I think you might have worked a little harder maybe than you admit to. But continuing on with the singing theme, I saw this wonderful film a couple of years ago that I think you and I chatted about briefly called 20 Feet from Stardom that I really enjoyed. And you were in that movie, and you were interviewed in that movie. And it occurred to me while I was watching the film that you were the only one interviewed, I think, in the whole movie that had actually successfully crossed those 20 feet to stardom from being a background singer for people like Michael Jackson. And I wanted to hear, even then, a lot more about what you had to say about that journey. First of all, there was an assumption in that movie that I wonder whether you agreed with, or seemed to be an assumption, that most backup singers who sing at that high level, you're with the Stones or you're with Sting or whoever, want to be lead singers, actually. Do you think that that's true?
I've worked with a lot of those people, and I think it is pretty true.
Pretty true?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do. I think that a lot of them tried.
Yeah.
And then while they were trying, they had work, and they got work. I mean, that was exactly my story. I went out to LA in hopes that I would get work, and then I would start playing and then get picked up or whatever. And I did backup work on the road, thinking, well, I'm going to, when I get home, I'm going to continue to do gigs and hopefully get record labels out and all that sort of thing. And, I mean, I think most people that are outperforming, now I think the people that are in the studio, like the Cissy Houstons and, the really high-powered singers, the Patty Austins. I mean, even Patty Austin was a backup singer and still is a backup singer and had some success as a front person. But for the most part, I think people who are out on stage performing love performing and would much rather be out front than they would be behind.
Do you think it's a different musical job? I mean, how would you describe the musical differences? I don't feel like just because for me personally, that just because you've got a really badass backup vocal technique, that necessarily means that you can be a compelling lead singer.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think of that, how the job is different musically speaking.
Yeah. I think it's a real discipline to learn how to blend with people and to learn how to make a blend work. You basically are attempting to cancel out any personality that you have in your voice in order to blend. And it's the personality in your voice that actually sets you apart as a front person. It's not it's really not that, it's not technique. I mean, you listen to Peter Gabriel, and there is no other voice on the planet like his. And when I made my first record with this producer, Bill Bottrell, who was a really interesting character, he'd said, you know, don't use any vibrato, and because he felt like it made it too pretty. And, you know, it just makes you sound generic. And it's funny, I did become a snob about singing. If you were a good singer, then you weren't an interesting singer or an artist. I mean, there is a fine line in there. You can't be so calculated. But I think that a lot of times why some people wind up out front is not because they're the best singer or because they're the most technically accomplished. It's because they have some perspective that people relate to, that authentically resonates, and that doesn't necessarily come from just being a great singer or a great backup singer or even a great musician. I mean, there are great musicians that don't make it. Yeah. I know a million people that are better singers than me, and you just go, why? I don't know. There's some divinity at large that works in your favor. There's also an immense amount of perseverance and tenacity, the ability to hear no more than yes. Yeah. You know.
I'm glad that you bring up perseverance and tenacity, because you're one of the most hardworking people, probably the most hardworking person I've ever been around in my life. It's an inspiration. And I think it's one of the very effective things about your leadership style. You know, of course, there's a big touring company, and you know, the band and crew adore you, and we know that you have 10 times the responsibilities that any of us have, and you don't complain, and so nobody else better very well complain either, you know.
Everybody can complain.
Nah, you know, but you know, you just set a really good example, and it got me wondering whether that leadership mode was something that you always kind of possessed, or whether, you know, being the head of this sort of big touring circus, you know, took some adjusting to. You know, did you always feel comfortable being the boss, you know, of these, or did it grow naturally as you?
Well, it definitely became easier knowing how to run a band. I mean, you can't get the experience. It's like any other job. You can't get the experience of doing it until you get the gig to do it, you know. And I'd sung in bands before, but being on the road is a different thing. And also just learning how to put shows together. You just don't, I guess it's different now because you have these big TV vehicles that create stars before they even get out and fall on their faces. Like, I had a lot of years to fall on my face and to figure out what worked for me and what didn't work in the privacy of my own career, you know, before I became well known. And it's, you know, it's just something that I enjoy more now because I have learned how to say no. I don't work nearly as hard as what I used to work.
That's terrifying.
Well, used to in the old days when I was younger, like we'd go out and we would tour for like 2 months, and we'd have like a week off here, and we'd tour for 3 more weeks and have a week off, and we'd play 6 days a week, and I would do interviews, and you know, and also drink and stay up all night and wake up being really tired the next day and do the whole thing over again. And you know, as you get older, a lot of things just get put into perspective, whether you like it or not. Yeah. And so there are things that you wind up enjoying. You know, I enjoy my life a lot more now, and I look around and I just think, oh gosh, I'm so lucky, you know. Yeah. And I have been lucky. I've been with the same people who've worked with me for 20 years, up until this last tour when there were some people that went on, and we kind of started building back. But the main people have been with me for 20 years, and we're like a family, and you know, we've grown up together. We're all getting old together. You know, we drink our tea. You know, we're a kinder, gentler version of ourselves.
Yeah. I could go on like this forever. I've actually got a bunch more questions, but I know that we need to get to questions from the audience before we leave. And so I think that maybe Kristen is here somewhere in the wings with cards from you guys. Thank you for your questions. Let's see what we have. Austin, asks, over the years as a musician...
I was like, Austin, wait a minute. Okay.
No, we're not going there. Over the years as a musician, have your experiences changed and your goals as a musician changed? How so?
Okay, has my what changed?
Have your experiences changed? How have your goals as a musician changed as you have aged? I guess.
Well, it's
That's
interesting.
My words,
I'll tell you, this has been a really, for me, 12 years ago, I turned 40. And there was like about 3 years, a build-up 3 years before that, where I just was lost. I'd been touring and working and touring and touring, making records, touring, working, making records. And I was heading up to my 40th birthday, and I wasn't married, I hadn't had kids. And everybody that was coming on the radio was like 12. It was like the new, well, not even 12. It was like Christina Aguilera, who was 19, and who else, Pink, and all these girls who were like 18 or 19. And I'm getting ready to turn 40, and I'm just like, what in the world? I don't even know what to write about anymore. I don't know what I'm doing, and how can I compete? And it was terrible. And I wound up trying to make a record. It took me a year and a half to make a record. It cost me like $1 million. I mean, anybody can spend $1 million on a record. This is before computers, where you can make a record now for, $1,000. But it was a hard time, and I was really thinking, I can't take a vacation until I finish this record. It was just like this stupid habit trail I'd put myself on. And I was in the studio one day, and Chrissy Hine was in the studio next door, and she came over, and I knew her from the Lilith tour, and she said, what are you doing? Your music is something you do. It is not your life. Your life is your life. That's just something you do in your life. And I took off a whole bunch of time until I wanted to come back to it. And on my 40th birthday, I threw this huge party. I invited everybody I knew, every famous person in LA, and I threw myself a party at the El Rey. And my band and I played all night, and everybody got up and played, sat in. I mean, Meg Ryan sat in. People who didn't even play. And then we went to another place, and we stayed up all night, and we just celebrated turning 40, and put the record out, and that was Soak Up the Sun, which wound up being a big hit. And I realized at that point, the idea of goals and the idea of you just set yourself up for so much when you look at your life so far ahead of yourself that you wind up just being a big ball of fear. Yeah. And I never did it again. Every record I've ever made, I just started with this phrase that I learned from this shrink I went to once, who said, just constantly, just when things are the worst and you're locked up in fear, just say thank you for infinite possibility. And I always think infinite possibility. The idea that what I'm getting ready to create is something I haven't even heard yet, and it's bound, it could be great. Yeah. It may surprise me, and how glorious is that? So, and that's just been the way it's been ever since. Yeah. So.
As you know, we're in a music school here, and I like this question from Rama maybe. There's been a lot of hype in the popular media that classical music is in danger of becoming obsolete. There's a lot of classical music, as you heard earlier, that gets played in this building. Yeah. This is a concern for those of us who are classically trained. Is there a note you would give us to find our unique passion in a growing sea of music?
Well, I mean, you are talking to a dinosaur here. Because I grew up, or because I came up before technology and before the shrinking of our attention span, I know what that's like to have people be captivated, to actually come out and see live music and to really be present and to be open and want to be transported and be moved. I grew up actually studying classical, but also going and listening to classical, and I play classical in my house all the time because I think it's good for kids, for their brains, and I enjoy it. And I have wondered about that because a lot of what comes in, even on the digital channels, how much of it is new, how much of it is old. Everything comes back around, and I think particularly with classical music, and particularly classical music that is familiar, it's a part of our consciousness. It's a part of our lineage. It's a part of our the construct of the way our brains accept education, accept math, and there's always a need for it. Whether there's a paying gig for it is the question. And my kids watch, a lot of Pixar movies, and I'm always thinking, well, all that incredible scoring that goes on seems to come from being able to read and being able to interpret. There's got to be a need for classically trained musicians. You just have to go to where the work is. We just got offered a gig to play at the Hollywood Bowl, and my agent just happened to drop a line at the end of the email, and by the way, you have carte blanche to use the symphony. And so there is work, but I understand. I mean, I feel the same way as any classically trained in the fact that what does it mean to make music now when no one even buys music anymore? How do they receive music? Is it through a subscription? How do we receive our music? And if people don't even feel like that it's worth paying for, then what does it mean to us as people who listen to music? I have to look at it and go, okay, well, if it's not going to be in the conventional sense of the word where you walk in and you pay somebody money to own a piece of music that somebody actually worked hard on, then maybe we, as musicians, figure out a way to utilize technology and the new outlets for music to get our classically trained music, our whatever it is that we're doing, get it out there for it to be heard. Setting up a YouTube channel and getting 5 players in a room to write an original piece of music, and just constantly getting your music out there and getting it heard. That's what people do. So, and it finds its way.
Yeah. Here's a lighter question that I like. Who rocks the hardest that you have played with?
Oh, there's just no question about it. The Rolling Stones. I mean, my first gig with the Rolling Stones, I was on my first tour, and I was in Europe, and the record was doing really well over there, and it was just starting to break over here. And my manager called and said, Mick Jagger's trying to get a hold of you. And there were no cell phones. So this is 1995. And I just was like, what in the world? Thinking that, well, what could that even be about? And so, I didn't think about it because about a week went by, and my manager kept calling and saying, have you heard from him? Have you heard from him? I was like, no, I haven't heard from him. Anyway, we were in Paris, and my phone rang at 4:30 in the morning in the hotel room, and it was Mick Jagger. And I thought it was a joke, so I did the conventional, And then I wake up totally like, bah! And he called back and said, no, it really is me. And they invited me to sing with them in Florida. And that was one of my very first big performances. And I was so nervous, I threw up all day. And I was white as a ghost. And as I walked up to sing with them, and it was being filmed for pay-per-view for, however many million people were going to see it, Bobby Keys, the beloved Bobby Keys sax player, handed me a bottle of tequila, and he called me Little Sister, which is what the band called me from then on. Here, have a little sip of courage, and I did. I walked out, and I had that immediate surreal dancing with Mick Jagger, and all I could think was being 14 and unzipping the zipper on the cover of that. Oh my God, it's Mick Jagger. So, but yes, they wrote the book on rock and roll, so there will never be another.
Yeah. Beth asks, who was the first concert that who was your first concert?
Okay, well, interestingly enough, my first concert was Peter Frampton. Yes, I was 13 years old, and my best friend, who was a single child, who was super spoiled, her mom drove us to Memphis, Tennessee, which was 2 hours away, an hour and a half now that they've changed the speed limit, but 2 hours away, and she took 6 of us girls, and we went and saw Peter Frampton. And we waited outside the door, waiting for him to come out. I'm sure he was long gone. And then cut to 20 years later, I was on the road with Michael Jackson, and we were in Australia, and I was in this rock hotel called the Siebel Townhouse, and I was on the elevator, and Peter Frampton walked into the elevator, and he's precious, but he did not look like what he looked like when he had his long hair singing Do You Feel? I mean, still darling. Yeah. But anyway, and I said, Mr. Frampton, you were my first concert when I was 13. He looked at me, and I was like, 25, and he was just like, oh. I mean, he literally rolled his eyes. And now I know. I still joke with him about that. But
yeah. He's a sweetie.
He is a sweetie. An epic.
Epic talent. This is a wonderful question. What role has faith played in your growth as an artist?
Yes. Well, I grew up, as I said, in a small town in basically what's considered to be the Bible Belt in southern Missouri. And I went to the Presbyterian church. My mom was Presbyterian. My dad was a golfer. And he would go on Easter and on Christmas, but the rest of us went with my mom. And I grew up in the church, and if any of you are Presbyterians, my mom calls them the frozen chosen. I know, it's just a funny, because it's very, every service is exactly the same. We use conventional old style hymns, hymn book, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. Nothing terribly inspiring about it. But I just always had a relationship with God. I never could really understand anything outside of the fact that I just had this, I just always felt God's presence and would pray all the time, all day long. Not on my knees, but just always talking to God, always had a dialogue with God. And I've been through a lot of different trips along the way. I was a born-again Christian when I was 17. When I found out about the book of Revelations and the end of the world, like this big revival came into town, and I went with my friends, and I came home and I told my parents, why didn't anybody tell me about the rapture? Why didn't anybody tell me about blah, blah, blah? And my mom was like, don't worry, you're saved. You were baptized. And that was the end of that. And I was like, no. And I had to I was just trying to get everyone that I knew saved. And then I eased back a little bit, and I started studying other religions, and I'm a Christian in my heart, but because I've traveled the world and because I've met so many people who aren't Christians, but who are faithful and who are very godly and seeking God's face, I think that there have been so many amazingly enlightened people that have walked the planet to illustrate to us what it means to be godly and what it means to be godlike. And my dialogue constantly continues. And Jesus is my homie, but I believe that, Muhammad and Buddha and Gandhi and so many other amazing people have walked this planet who have had the teachings of God come through them. And that's my wacky way of looking at it.
Maybe this question from Sarah is related. She asks, if you've had a low point in your life, what helped you keep going and not give up on your passion?
Well, my passion has been sort of a go-to for me. And as I said a while ago, I have had sometimes to make that be something I didn't run to and hide behind and really face the music. I am a person who comes from a long line of really high people and really low people. So my highs are extremely palpable to me. They are joyous and just euphoric. And then my lows have been extremely low and sometimes have been me digging my way out. And meditation became about 17 or 18 years ago a real kind of a little bit of a lifesaver for me, in that all the talking I've done to God for years was just part of what also was a continuation of a very active brain that at one point felt like had taken over, and everything from here down was just dead. This crazy go to sleep, not even go to sleep, but fight to go to sleep at night with what they call monkey brain, a very active brain, and that brain that is constantly going, "You're not good enough," or "That song sucks," or "Wish you were taller," or "You shouldn't eat that." All those things that we tell ourselves about who we are. And meditation has been a means for me to practice, and that's what it is, a practice, to quiet my brain, to listen, and to learn compassion. Learn compassion for myself, and the fact that my meditations are never going to be perfect, and that ultimately winds up being my awake self. That compassion becomes a posture, not something that I realize every now and again, that it is a part of, that it is my first reaction to things. And it's really, I think, softened the edges and has been what has helped me create some levity in what I feel like is a very chaotic world we live in already. So, and then compound that with the pressures that we put on ourselves to be more than what we think we should be. So, does that make sense?
Yeah. We've got a lot of questions here. I promised this fine lady that I would get her home, or on her way home, by 9:30. And as you see, we've got some instruments set up over here. And so with your permission, thank you so much for your questions. I think I may transition into the